The Night Watchman. Be Night Watchman wanted. Ashmont Observatory. $35 per hour. Must be comfortable working alone. Apply in person only. $35 an hour. In a small town like Millbrook, Vermont, that kind of money didn't just appear. Not for someone like me, fresh out of county jail with a record that made most employers politely decline before I even finished my application. But I needed it. God, I needed it. My sister Emma was 3 months behind on her mortgage, and the bank wasn't sending friendly reminders anymore. They were sending foreclosure notices. The Ashmont Observatory sat on Widow's Peak, a mountain ridge that overlooked the town like a sleeping giant. I'd driven past it countless times growing up, that white dome visible from anywhere in the valley, catching the sunlight during the day and glowing softly under the moon at night. As a kid, I'd imagined scientists up there discovering new planets, mapping distant galaxies. The reality, I would learn, was far stranger. The road up to the observatory wound through dense pine forest, the kind that blocks out the sun even at noon. By the time I reached the parking lot, my old Honda was wheezing from the climb, and my palms were sweating despite the October chill. The building itself was larger than it appeared from town. A sprawling complex of white concrete and steel, with that iconic dome rising from the center like a pearl. Inside, the lobby was sterile and cold. Linoleum floors that squeaked under my boots. Walls covered with faded photographs of astronomers from decades past, their faces stern and unsmiling. A receptionist desk sat empty, a thin layer of dust coating the keyboard and mouse. I wondered when someone had last sat there. "You hear about the job?" The voice came from behind me, making me jump. I turned to find a woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a white lab coat over a turtleneck. Her eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, assessing me with the kind of look that sees through every lie you've ever told. "Yes, ma'am. Name's Tyler Reed." She didn't offer her hand. "Dr. Vera Ashmont. My grandfather built this place in 1951. I run it now, or what's left of it to run." She gestured for me to follow. "Walk with me." We moved through corridors lit by flickering fluorescent tubes. The walls were lined with more photographs, charts of star systems, and whiteboards covered in equations I couldn't begin to understand. But what struck me most was the emptiness. No voices, no footsteps, no sounds of human activity. Just our echoing steps and the distant hum of machinery. "I'll be direct with you, Mr. Reed," Dr. Ashmont said without looking back. "This observatory is dying. Federal funding dried up 8 years ago. Private donors lost interest. We're down to a skeleton crew, and by skeleton crew I mean myself and 2 research assistants who come in 3 days a week. The night position has been difficult to fill." "Why's that?" I asked, already sensing I wouldn't like the answer. She stopped at a heavy metal door marked Observation Deck, Authorized Personnel Only. "Because the last 4 watchmen quit within their first week. One of them didn't even make it through his first night." I should have turned around right then. Should have walked back down that mountain and found some other way to help Emma. But I thought of the foreclosure notice, of my sister's 2 kids who needed stability, of how I'd promised to make things right after everything I'd put the family through. "I can handle it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Dr. Ashmont studied me for a long moment, then pulled out a key ring heavy with brass keys. "The position is simple. You arrive at sunset, approximately 6 p.m. this time of year. You leave at sunrise. Your job is to monitor the building, ensure no unauthorized persons enter, and most importantly, follow the protocols I'm about to explain." She unlocked the door, revealing a stairwell that spiraled upward into darkness. "Come, I'll show you your station." We climbed for what felt like forever, the stairs twisting up through the heart of the building. My legs were burning by the time we reached the top, where another door waited. Dr. Ashmont pushed it open, and I stepped into the observation deck. The room was circular, maybe 50 feet in diameter, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the valley below. In the center stood the telescope, a massive instrument that looked like something from a science fiction film, all gleaming metal and intricate mechanisms. Control panels lined the walls, their screens dark. And there, in one corner, was a small desk with a chair, a thermos, and a logbook. "This is where you'll spend your nights," Dr. Ashmont said. "The protocols are written in the logbook. I need you to read them carefully before your first shift." She walked to the desk and opened the logbook to the first page. Even from a distance, I could see the handwriting was different on each page, as if multiple people had written in it. Some entries were neat and careful. Others were scrawled, almost frantic. "Protocol 1, Dr. Ashmont read aloud. "The telescope must never be used between sunset and sunrise. Under no circumstances should you look through the eyepiece during your shift. If you hear the telescope moving on its own, do not approach it. Wait in the security office downstairs until it stops." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Moving on its own? Protocol 2, she continued, ignoring my question. "If you hear voices coming from the observation deck when you're not on it, do not investigate. Secure the door and remain on the ground floor until they cease." "Dr. Ashmont, Protocol 3. This is the most important one, Mr. Reed. Listen carefully." She met my eyes, and I saw something there I hadn't noticed before. Fear. "Between the hours of 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., something will knock on the observation deck door. Always 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. Do not open the door. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge the knocking in any way. Sit at your desk, face away from the door, and wait until it stops." My mouth had gone dry. "What's knocking?" "That's not a question you want answered, Mr. Reed." She closed the logbook. "The protocols exist for a reason. Follow them exactly and you'll be fine. Every watchman who quit did so because they broke protocol. The one who didn't make it through the night." She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "He opened the door. What happened to him? We found him the next morning. Physically, he was unharmed. Mentally," she shook her head. "He's in Riverside Psychiatric now. Hasn't spoken a coherent word in 6 months. I should have left. Every instinct was screaming at me to walk away, to find some other job, any other job. But then I thought of Emma, of the desperation in her voice when she'd called last week, telling me she didn't know how she'd keep the kids fed if they lost the house. 'I'll take it,' I heard myself say. 'When do I start?' Dr. Ashmont looked at me with something that might have been pity. 'Tonight. Be here by 5:30 p.m. I'll give you the security codes and keys. And Mr. Reed,' she paused at the door, 'whatever you do, don't try to figure out why the protocols exist. Just follow them. Some questions are better left unasked.' After she left, I stood alone in the observation deck, looking out over the valley. Millbrook spread out below like a toy village, already starting to glow as streetlights flickered on. The sun was setting behind the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful, peaceful. I approached the telescope, drawn by curiosity. It was an old design, probably from when the observatory first opened. The eyepiece was covered with a leather cap, secured with a small padlock. Someone had taken great care to ensure it couldn't be used. As I stood there, I noticed something carved into the telescope's base. Words, etched deeply into the metal as if someone had worked at them for hours with a sharp tool. I knelt down to read them. "It sees what we cannot. It knows what we deny. The door opens both ways." A cloud passed over the setting sun, and the room suddenly felt much colder. I pulled my jacket tighter and headed for the stairs, eager to get back to ground level, back to the normal world where telescopes were just instruments and doors only open one way. I returned that evening at 5:15 p.m., the last light bleeding from the sky. Dr. Ashmont was waiting in the lobby, looking more haggard than she had that afternoon, as if the approaching night weighed on her. "The keys," she said, handing me a ring with 4 brass keys. "Front door, security office, observation deck, and equipment room. The codes for the alarm system are written here." She gave me a laminated card. "And this is for emergencies only. A cell phone, old and battered. It only has 1 number programmed. Mine. Use it if something happens that the protocols don't cover." "Like what?" "You'll know if it happens." She headed for the door, then stopped. "Mr. Reed, I want you to understand something. My grandfather built this observatory for a specific purpose. It wasn't just about studying the stars. He knew, that there were things out there that shouldn't be seen. That some discoveries were dangerous. The protocols aren't superstition. They're protection. Protection from what? She looked at me with tired eyes. From the same thing my grandfather spent 30 years trying to keep contained. Good night, Mr. Reed. Lock the doors behind me. The sound of her car driving away left me in total silence. I locked the front doors, set the alarm, and stood in the empty lobby, listening to my own heartbeat. The building seemed to settle around me, old wood and metal creaking as temperature dropped. Through the windows, I could see darkness spreading across the valley like spilled ink. I decided to familiarize myself with the building before night fell completely. The ground floor was mostly administrative offices, all locked and empty. The second floor held research labs, also locked, with windows that looked in on tables covered with dust-draped equipment. On the third floor, I found the security office, a small room with monitors showing feeds from cameras throughout the building. Most of the screens showed empty hallways and dark rooms, but one camera pointed at the observation deck door from inside the stairwell. As I watched, the door seemed to shudder slightly, though there was no wind up there. I checked my watch. 7:23 p.m. The sun had been down for over an hour. Time to head up to my post. The climb up the spiral staircase felt longer than it had that afternoon. The motion sensor lights flickered on as I ascended, then flickered off behind me, creating a moving bubble of light that made the darkness above and below seem deeper. By the time I reached the observation deck door, my breathing was heavy, and not just from exertion. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The observation deck at night was transformed. During the day, it had been bright and open. Now it felt vast and oppressive, the windows showing nothing but blackness. The telescope loomed in the center like a sleeping giant, its covered eyepiece pointing toward the dome's closed shutter. I went to the desk and sat down, pulling the logbook toward me. The most recent entries were dated from last week, written in a shaky hand. October 15th. First night. Protocols seem straightforward. Quiet so far. 11:47 p.m. October 15th. Heard something moving upstairs, but I'm on the top floor. Following protocol 2. Not investigating. 1:34 a.m. October 15th. The knocking came 3 times, exactly as described. I didn't open the door. I didn't look, but I could hear breathing on the other side. Heavy breathing, like something that had run a long distance. 2:47 a.m. October 15th. It's been knocking for 40 minutes now. Not stopping. The protocol said it would stop. Why isn't it stopping? 3:26 a.m. The next entry was in different handwriting, clinical and neat. Dr. Ashmont's. October 16th. Found night watchman David Chun in catatonic state. Observation deck door was open. Protocol 3 violated. Position remains vacant. I flipped back through earlier entries, finding similar patterns. Watchman starting confident, growing increasingly disturbed, then either quitting or breaking protocol. One entry from 2 years ago caught my eye. March 8th. I can see something in the telescope's reflection when I walk past it. A face that isn't mine. It's watching me. I know I'm not supposed to use the telescope, but what if I'm supposed to see what it sees? What if that's the real test? 12:43 a.m. That watchman had quit the next day. The entry after his was stark. March 9th. Previous watchman reported severe psychological distress. Claims to have seen the thing behind the stars in his dreams. Refusing treatment. Position remains vacant. I closed the logbook, my hands trembling slightly. Outside the windows, the night was complete. No moon tonight, just stars scattered across the black canvas of space. They should have been beautiful. Instead, they looked like eyes. Thousands of distant eyes watching. My first few hours passed slowly. I walked the perimeter of the observation deck, checking the windows, making sure everything was secure. I avoided looking at the telescope directly, but I could feel it there, a presence in the room. At 10:30 p.m., I heard the building settling, old metal groaning as it cooled. Normal sounds. Explainable sounds. At 11:15 p.m., I heard the first voice. It came from somewhere above me, which should have been impossible. The observation deck was the highest point in the building. But there it was, a man's voice, faint but distinct, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. It sounded like he was having a conversation with someone, his tone rising and falling naturally. Protocol 2. Do not investigate. Secure the door and remain on the ground floor. I grabbed the logbook and keys and hurried down the spiral staircase, my footsteps echoing in the narrow space. I locked the observation deck door behind me and retreated to the security office, my heart pounding. On the monitors, I could see the empty observation deck. The telescope stood motionless. The windows reflected nothing but darkness. And yet, through the door I just locked, I could still hear the voice. Clearer now. It was reading something. Numbers. Coordinates. Right ascension. 14 hours. 29 minutes. Declination. -62 degrees. 40 minutes. I realized with a chill that those were astronomical coordinates. Someone or something was reading star positions. And as I listened, I heard a second voice join the first. Then a third. Soon, a whole chorus of voices filled the building, all reading coordinates, all calling out to stars I couldn't see. The cacophony lasted for 20 minutes before fading to silence. When it was over, I waited another 10 minutes before gathering the courage to return to the observation deck. The climb up felt like ascending to a gallows. The room was exactly as I'd left it. Nothing had changed. Nothing had moved. And yet, the air felt different, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. I sat back down at the desk and made my entry in the logbook. October 23rd. Heard voices. Multiple voices reading coordinates. Followed Protocol 2. They stopped after approximately 20 minutes. 11:52 p.m. I checked my watch. 3 more hours until the knocking. The time between midnight and 2 a.m. was the longest of my life. Every sound made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept the desk lamp on, creating a small circle of light in the vast darkness of the observation deck. I tried to focus on my phone, but there was no signal up here. Just me, the telescope, and the watching stars. At 1:47 a.m., I heard footsteps on the spiral staircase. Slow, measured steps climbing toward the observation deck. Getting closer. I grabbed the edge of the desk, ready to run. But where would I go? The only exit was the door those footsteps were approaching. They reached the landing outside. Stopped. I held my breath, waiting for the door to open, but it remained closed. The footsteps resumed, this time descending, going back down. I listened until they faded completely, my knuckles white from gripping the desk. 2 a.m. arrived with the precision of an executioner's blade. I turned my chair to face away from the door, as Protocol 3 instructed, sat with my back to whatever was about to happen, and waited. The knock came at 2:03 a.m., not on the door, but on the window behind me. My blood froze. The observation deck was 5 stories up. There was nothing outside those windows but air and a long drop to the ground. And yet, there it was again. Knock, knock, knock. 3 deliberate strikes against the glass, evenly spaced, patient. Protocol 3 said the knocking would be on the door. It said nothing about the windows. I sat rigid in my chair, every muscle locked, staring at the desk in front of me. The knocking continued, moving from window to window, circling the room. Whatever was out there was walking around the outside of the observation deck, 5 stories above the ground, knocking on each window in turn. Knock, 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 getting closer to my position. I could hear something else now beneath the knocking. Breathing. The same heavy breathing the previous watchman had described. Sounded wrong somehow. Too wet, too labored, like lungs that didn't work quite right. The knocking reached the window directly behind my head. The glass rattled with each strike. I squeezed my eyes shut, teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. Don't turn around. Don't look. Don't acknowledge it. Then I heard the voice. It came from right behind me, on the other side of the glass, speaking in a whisper that somehow carried clearly through the thick pain. Tyler. It knew my name. How did it know my name? Tyler Reed. Inmate number 47823. Essex County Correctional. 3 years for vehicular manslaughter. Your fault she died. Your fault Emma lost her sister. Your fault, your fault, your fault. My sister Sarah. The accident that had sent me to prison. That had destroyed my family. That haunted every quiet moment. This thing knew about it. It was using it against me. Look at me, Tyler. See what you've become. See what you really are. I bit down on my tongue until I tasted blood, using the pain to anchor myself. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge. Don't look. The breathing grew heavier, more agitated. The knocking became pounding, the glass vibrating so hard I thought it would shatter. And through it all, that voice kept whispering, telling me things about myself, about my past, about the accident. Details I'd never told anyone. Secrets I'd kept locked away. Then, at 2:59 a.m., it stopped. The pounding, the breathing, the voice, all of it ceased as if cut with a knife. I sat trembling in my chair, sweat soaking through my shirt despite the cold. I didn't move for another 10 minutes, terrified it would start again. When I finally worked up the courage to turn around, the windows showed nothing but darkness and stars. No face pressed against the glass. No figure clinging to the outside of the building. Whatever had been there was gone. I made my entry in the logbook with shaking hands. October 23rd. The knocking came at 2:03 a.m. Not on the door as expected, but on the windows. It knew my name. It knew things about me. Followed Protocol 3 as closely as possible, though it wasn't the door. It stopped at 2:59 a.m. 3:17 a.m. The rest of the night passed without incident. I sat at the desk, watching the sky slowly lighten from black to navy to pale blue. When dawn finally broke over the eastern mountains, I felt like I'd survived a war. Dr. Ashmont arrived at 6:30 a.m., looking unsurprised to find me still there. "You made it through," she said simply. "That's more than most do. Same time tonight." I wanted to quit, wanted to tell her I'd find some other way to help Emma. But then I thought of that $35 an hour, of how much I could earn in just a week. "Yeah," I heard myself say. "Same time tonight." She nodded. "The knocking on the windows means it's getting stronger. It usually takes several weeks to reach that point. You must be." She paused, searching for the word, particularly interesting to it. "What is it?" I asked. "My grandfather had a theory," she said, gazing up at the observation deck. "He believed that when we look at the stars, sometimes the stars look back. That there are things out there in the spaces between spaces that can see us when we see them. The telescope was supposed to prove it, and it did. But what he found was worse than he'd imagined. Then why keep the observatory open? Why not just shut it down, demolish it?" Dr. Ashmont's smile was bitter. "Because shutting it down is what would release it completely. The protocols, the rituals, they're not keeping it out, Mr. Reed. They're keeping it contained. This building is a cage. And you're the night guard making sure the bars hold." She left me with that cheerful thought. I drove down the mountain in a daze, the morning sun feeling less warm than it should. When I got home to my apartment, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice whispering my name, telling me my secrets. I spent the day researching the Ashmont Observatory, finding precious little information. Most of what existed was from its early days, glowing articles about cutting-edge astronomical research, about discoveries that would reshape our understanding of the cosmos. But around 1955, the articles stopped. The observatory went quiet, retreating from the public eye. There was one article from 1954 that caught my attention. A small piece in the Millbrook Gazette, barely a few paragraphs, reporting that Dr. Marcus Ashmont, the observatory's founder, had been hospitalized following a workplace accident. No details about the accident were provided. Dr. Ashmont recovered but never published any findings from his research. He died in 1982, leaving the observatory to his daughter, who left it to her daughter, Vera. 3 generations of Ashmonts, all keeping watch over something they refused to explain. I arrived for my second shift with a sense of grim determination. This time I was prepared. I'd brought earplugs in case the voices started again, a thermos of coffee to stay alert, and a rosary my mother had given me years ago. I'm not particularly religious, but at that point, I was willing to try anything. The night began much like the first. Quiet hours in the observation deck, the telescope looming in the darkness. But around 10 p.m., I noticed something new. The telescope was pointed in a different direction. I was certain it had been facing east yesterday. Now it was angled toward the north. Protocol 1. The telescope must never be used between sunset and sunrise. If you hear it moving, do not approach it. I hadn't heard it moving, but it had definitely moved. I noted the direction carefully, planning to check if it changed again. At 11:30 p.m., the voices returned. But this time they weren't reading coordinates. They were arguing. Multiple voices, talking over each other, debating something I couldn't quite follow. They spoke in technical jargon, discussing apertures and focal lengths and optimal viewing conditions for the breach. I followed Protocol 2 again, retreating to the security office. On the monitors, I watched the observation deck, and this time I saw something that made my blood run cold. The telescope was moving, slowly, smoothly, tracking across the sky as if following something. And in its reflection, in the polished metal of its housing, I could see figures. Indistinct shapes that moved around it, reaching toward it, caressing it like a beloved tool. The voices continued their debate for over an hour before falling silent. When I returned to the observation deck, the telescope had moved again. It now pointed directly at the observation deck door, as if watching it, waiting for something to come through. The knocking came early that night. 1:47 a.m., a full 15 minutes before it should have started. And this time it was on the door. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. Exactly as the protocol described. I turned my chair away from the door and stared at the desk, trying to focus on anything but the sound. Tyler. The voice came through the door, clearer than it had been through the window. I know you can hear me. I know you're listening. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge. You want to know what I am? What I really am. The voice was patient, almost friendly. I'm what happens when you look too long at the void. I'm what looks back. Your grandfather Ashmont understood. He saw me through the telescope and I saw him and we made a connection. A beautiful, terrible connection. The door handle rattled. I gripped the edges of my desk, my knuckles white. He tried to close the door, tried to seal me away. But the door opens both ways, Tyler. He opened it when he looked through that telescope, and now it can never be fully closed. All we can do is keep it mostly shut. All you can do is hold the latch. The knocking grew faster, more insistent. The door shuddered in its frame. But I'm getting stronger. Every night, every watchman who sits in that chair, every person who enters this building, they feed me. Their fear, their attention, their awareness of me. It all makes me more real, more present, more able to push through. I wanted to run, wanted to flee down those stairs and never come back. But something kept me in that chair. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of Emma's desperate voice on the phone. Or maybe it was something else, something the thing on the other side of the door was doing to me, binding me to this place. Open the door, Tyler. Just a crack. Just enough to see what you're really guarding against. Don't you want to know? Don't you want to understand what you're part of? My hand, moving of its own accord, reached toward the door. I watched in horror as my fingers stretched out, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't resist. The protocols screamed in my mind, but my body wasn't listening. I was standing now, walking toward the door, my hand closing around the handle. The metal was cold, so cold it burned. The voice on the other side grew excited, eager. Yes, yes, just like that. Turn the handle. Open the door. See what waits in the space between stars. See what your precious protocols are really protecting. My hand turned the handle. I felt the latch disengage. The door began to open, revealing a sliver of the stairwell beyond. Except it wasn't the stairwell. It was darkness, absolute and complete, a void that seemed to pull at me like a physical force. And in that void something moved, something vast and wrong, composed of angles that hurt to perceive and colors that shouldn't exist. I saw a suggestion of a face, if faces could have too many eyes and mouths in wrong places, if skin could be made of the same substance as starlight and shadow. The rosary around my neck suddenly burned hot against my chest. The pain broke whatever hold the thing had on me. I slammed the door shut, throwing my full weight against it, and twisted the lock with trembling hands. The thing on the other side screamed, not with a voice, but with a sound that resonated in my bones, a frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. The door bulged inward, the metal warping as something pressed against it from the other side. I stumbled backward, falling against the desk. The observation deck lights flickered, and in the moments of darkness between flickers, I saw it manifested in the room with me. A towering shape composed of writhing darkness and sick light, with those impossible eyes fixed on me with hunger and rage. The lights flickered back on and it was gone, but I could still feel it there, just beyond the edge of perception, pressing against reality like a face pressed against glass from the other side. The rest of the night lasted an eternity. I huddled at the desk, rosary clutched in my fist, waiting for dawn. The thing didn't knock again. It didn't need to. We both knew how close I'd come to letting it through. Dr. Ashmont took one look at me when she arrived and knew something had changed. "You opened the door," she said flatly. "Just a crack," I whispered. "I saw." "Don't." She held up a hand. "Don't tell me what you saw. Once you speak it, once you give it words, it becomes more real. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked." She led me down to her office, a cluttered room filled with filing cabinets and old papers. From a locked drawer, she pulled out a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "My grandfather's notes," she said, opening it to a page marked with a ribbon. "Read this." The handwriting was precise, almost mechanical. "June 14th, 1954. I have made a terrible mistake. The telescope works too well. Last night, I observed the region of space I've designated as point zero, the area between Centaurus and Cercinus where star density drops inexplicably. The calculations suggested something should be there, but all previous observations showed only void. Through the new lens array I saw it. Not a celestial body. Not a phenomenon we have words for. It was watching back. It saw me see it, and in that moment of mutual recognition, a door opened. Not a physical door, but a door nonetheless. A connection between here and there, between our reality and somewhere else. It spoke to me, not with sound, but I heard it nonetheless. Told me it had been waiting, that it had always been waiting, that every astronomer who'd ever pointed a telescope at the stars had brushed against it, felt its presence at the edge of their perception, but none had looked deeply enough. Until now, I've closed the shutters, covered the telescope, but I can still feel it there, pressing against the barrier between worlds, looking for a way through. I fear I've done something irreversible. I fear I've invited something into our reality that cannot be uninvited. I looked up at Dr. Ashmont. He let it in. "He opened the door," she corrected. "But he also created the protocols, figured out how to keep it mostly contained. The building itself has become part of the barrier. The rituals, the rules, they reinforce it. And the night watchman," she paused. "The night watchman is the anchor, a human presence, maintaining the boundary, keeping the thing's attention divided." "You're using us as bait," I realized. "We're using you as guardians," she said. "There's a difference. Every night you sit in that observation deck, every night you follow the protocols, you're keeping that thing from fully manifesting. If we left the building empty, if no one was there to maintain the boundary, it would slip through completely. And then what? Then it would spread. My grandfather believed it's a kind of infection, a way of being that consumes normal reality. It would start with Millbrook, then spread outward, converting everything it touched into more of itself. A cascade of unreality spreading across the world. I sat back, my mind reeling. So I'm supposed to just keep coming back? Keep sitting in that room while it tries to break through? Yes. Dr. Ashmont's gaze was unflinching. That's exactly what I'm asking. Because the alternative is worse. Much worse. I thought about quitting. Thought about it hard. But I also thought about Emma, about my nephew and niece, about the world they lived in. If what Dr. Ashmont said was true, walking away meant condemning them to something unimaginable. How long? I asked. How long do I have to do this? Until we find another way to seal the breach, she said. Or until you can't do it anymore. Whichever comes first. I returned that night and the night after and the night after that. Each shift brought new horrors. The voices grew more insistent, the knocking more violent. The telescope moved every night, tracking something across the sky, and sometimes I'd catch glimpses of that thing in its reflection, watching, waiting. On my 5th night, I found an addition to the logbook. Someone had written in the margin of the protocol page, in handwriting that grew increasingly erratic as it progressed. The protocols are lies. They don't protect you. They're feeding it. Every night you sit there, every night you resist, you're giving it exactly what it wants. Your fear, your attention, your acknowledgement. That's what makes it real. That's what lets it through. The only way to stop it is to stop feeding it. Let the building go empty. Let the thing rage against nothing. Starve it of human consciousness. But she won't do it. Dr. Ashmont won't let the building close because she knows what it means. She knows that the thing is already part of her, has been since her grandfather opened that door. It's in the Ashmont bloodline now, passed down generation to generation. She needs it as much as it needs her. Get out while you can. Get out before you become part of it too. The entry wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting from earlier entries. David Chen, the watchman who'd opened the door and ended up in Riverside Psychiatric. Somehow he'd come back or someone had brought his journal pages here.